we'll proceed accordingly. Well, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Hope you all had a great 4th of July weekend. Slightly different than probably what we would like to do for celebration, but yet still a great time to be off and have quiet time with family and friends. Today we do have a guest speaker that's going to join us at 4:45. Roy Austin, and when we're ready to present and discuss, Sharon will introduce him and provide a brief overview of his presentation.
Quentin, just so you know, I think Roy just joined us, so I just want to let you know he's here whenever we're ready.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Before our speaker, I would want to remind everyone there are several of you who did not complete the
survey.
I don't want to call you out on the video, but you know, if you did or did not complete and submit it, we need you to, as soon after the meeting is over, to go onto the link and click on the 3 top themes you'd like to be on, and we will respond. We'll make some assignments at the end of today's meeting so that we can keep the progress going forward. Next week, we will talk about, we will have representatives from Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, and we'll talk details on that after our speaker today. You should have also received the task force scope of work draft number 3. That's the document that we're going to be working off of until further notice of any added changes that come forth from the task force. Did everyone receive that draft 3? Or I should say, is there anyone who did not receive draft 3? Co-chair, do you have any opening comments?
No, I'm looking forward to the presentation, and then after that, you know, the business at hand. I would again echo your comments that you really should respond to the survey so that we can move forward. Otherwise, you know, you may be contacted individually, but it would be nice if everyone complied with the survey so we can move forward. That's it.
All right.
Well,
any opening comments from any task force member?
Can you hear me? It's Tim.
Yes, Tim.
I have a concern that we not spend a whole lot of time in conversations with folks outside of the group. I think, this is just me, I think we have enough materials. I've certainly sent enough myself, and others have, that I think we need to go through these materials and identify what we think most people can agree with, so we have actually the beginning of a document of actions that we all agree with.
And the first assignment
was
the first assignment for you to do was to fill out the survey. If you fill out the survey, you get your assignment to begin reviewing those documents. So you're one of the ones who didn't do it.
I know that. And my answer is, when I saw it, it said it had to be in by noon. And I didn't see it because I'm dealing with a lot of emails. So that's why I didn't respond, because I thought it was already too late.
Yeah, noon
so I know that it will be done.
Noon of last Wednesday.
So I wanted to finish. My point is, this is my preference, that we go through the materials that we have and identify action points and steps, including legislative proposals that we've gotten from across the country, across the nation, some of which have already been passed, that hopefully most of us can agree on. Maybe even if the staff took all of these points and put them into a Google document where we can check off what we all agree with. And then if we have questions of what might be possible or impossible, or what might have to be altered, Then if we talk to people who are in some position of power and influence, we may be able to have more informed questions to ask of them. But we've already done a lot of the homework.
I appreciate your observation, Tim, and we will definitely have plenty of time to review documents within your subcommittee, and you can bring forth any recommendations that you deem appropriate.
I agree with Tim 100,000%. I think we are lagging out this process. This is Brandy.
You agree 100% what, Brandy?
Did you not hear what Tim just stated?
I understand that.
So I'm saying I agree with what he just stated, that it would be great because we have things already that we can look at and to look at what we can implement. Now, I'm sorry, I'm still speaking. I'm sorry, I'm still talking. And that we can look at now and implement or see what is implementable, opposed to going through this entire process as if it was never done before. We can take data that we already have from the same process we are about to do right now and look at that to see what's implementable. We can look at what is being implemented right now and what has already been implemented in other cities to see if that is implementable. But I don't think that is what we are going to do. I don't think that is, and I don't know how much this process is democratic. I don't know how much this process is collective or, taking everyone's points and positions in, or how much this is like led by the chairs and what you all want to happen. And so I just want to, so you can maybe make that clear for me. But I thought that what people on this task force wanted mattered.
May I please chime in? Brandy, thank you for that. And again, you basically indicated a very pragmatic, expeditious approach to, let's get something done here. And we totally agree. I personally, I think I speak for both of us as co-chairs. This is not going to be a process or an exercise in futility. We've had a lot of those. However, the mayor is very much so wanting some specific recommendations and outcomes. You're correct. I said that last week, is that we have to establish the baseline. Baselines will probably be more so established next Monday after we hear from our public safety and police officials to see where we're at. We're going to have an open dialogue, but for the most part, it'll be questions that will be sent. And Dr. Bullock will talk about that later. But I just want to allay your concern as well as probably others, is that our goal is to come up with things now. And Tim has already said that if there's low-hanging fruit or something that we can do right now or is being done, that we need to acknowledge that. That'll start next week, for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to go on record, and then I'm not going to say anything else. That I don't think that the foundation of our work should be coming from a conversation with police. Let me
say this, Brandy, it's because we have to understand procedures and what have you that we're not privy to, and they're going to discuss that. What I want to emphasize is that we have to have informed decisions, informed recommendations, not just, what sounds good, but we have to be not only just educated, informed, we have to know. And the only way to know what you're talking about is to get the angles, to get the information from all sides. So I agree with you. It's going to come from this group. But it's an informed decision on what recommendations we made. Does that make sense?
I think it's backward. I think
wait. I think it makes sense, but all I'm saying is that we have that already. I'm not talking about being uninformed. I've heard from the police a gazillion times what we could do. Tim has been at these tables as well. We have it already done. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not going to say it over and over again, but I can't be more clear as to how we already have the results of these conversations in hand.
And can I just speak for the task force? You have been in the trenches. You really have been in the trenches for a while now. You and Tim for years and years. You all have that information. But there are other task force members that have not been in the same spaces that you have been in. You've been in protests on the front line, talking to the chief, the mayor, et cetera, et cetera. Just please allow a collective effort to include the others that come from all aspects of the community, so to speak. And they may have a little bit of a curve for them to absorb all the information that you all have. Just, if you could just be patient and work with this task force, we'll get it done, and it'll come from this task force.
I'm going to say one more thing and I'll close up for a while. I think it's backward, and this is my reasoning. Folks should go through the items of recommendations that have already been made, both locally and nationally, including legislation that's been passed across the nation. And go through what we think, or some of us think, should be implemented, and then talk to the police chief and the safety director. Do you think these things that we're recommending are workable, or what are the obstacles? We can't say that next Monday because we haven't done it. I can say it because I've been dealing with it for 15 years, and I have all kinds of documents. Brandy's been dealing with it for years. Some of us can say that. The group needs to be able to say it because we take time to go through what's being proposed and seeing what's workable. Then we ask those officials, is what we're asking, are these things workable? Right now, it's backward, in my opinion.
Dr. Bullock, did you want to?
If I may say something before Dr. Bullock, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So I just want to, and first of all, thank you, Brandy, and thank you, Tim. And I want to say that I also mirror what they're saying. And although you don't know me, I've been in the trenches taking care of things that I can for 10 years as well, and have been to protests, and have been tear gas, shot at with rubber bullets, hit with flash bombs, and hit by police battalions. And for years, multiple times. And one of the things that I don't want us to do, and I can hear it in what Tim and Brandy are saying, is to get stuck on, we're interviewing this person, we're collecting this data, but we're not making progress. We have what we need to make progress. We need to do it. I think it's very important that we do meet with the chief of police. Now, we do talk with him, absolutely, because that's why we're here, for sure. But we must make it a point to streamline the conversations that we're having and actually bring something to the table and say, here are our solutions to the problems that we know at hand. If you don't know what the problems are right now, it is not for a lack of seeing it happen. Everybody knows, it's everywhere. We have what we need to move forward. We need to formulate our plan and have something we're gonna bring to the table with the police, because I also don't want to hear from the police what they may have in place, because whatever it is that doesn't involve brutality, they're not doing it. With all due respect, they're not. So do we need to have a conversation with them? Absolutely. But we need to start bringing in some, here goes what we see is immediate and needs to happen now. There is no reason why people are still being hit with tear gas and rubber bullets today, yesterday, 4th of July. There's no reason. And we need to make things happen sooner than later. And it can't happen after several meetings and several speakers. And I think that's where the frustration's coming from. If I'm wrong, by all means, let me know. But that's what I feel. And I think that that's echoed by Tim and Brandy, and I'm sure other people.
This is Monica. Can I say something?
Well, Amanda had her hand raised. I'm trying.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Amanda Green Hawkins had her hand raised.
Oh, thank you. I couldn't hear you. Excuse me. I definitely understand where Brandy, Patricia, and Tim are coming from. I've been in protests in all around places all around this country, come across police. I definitely understand what they're saying. But as a member of the task force, I think that it's good for everybody on the task force to be operating from the same foundation. Because only with that same level of understanding do I think that we can all then have productive conversations about what needs to happen next. And I think part of that does include having the police speak to us first, so we understand what foundation we're operating from, because not all of us have that same foundational understanding. And once we have that, we can then roll up our sleeves and do that work that Brandy and Patricia and Tim are talking about. And it might be worth another discussion with the police when we come back with the things that we want to do, not for permission, not looking for permission, but looking for additional understanding as to whether or not certain things would be effective. Now, when it comes to some of the more heightened things that Patricia's talking about, we may want to go ahead and start making recommendations about the use of chemical weapons against people. Some of those more heightened, emergent things, yeah, we may want to take a look at and respond sooner rather than later. But for some long-term policy kinds of things, I think it's good to have the foundation, come up with the solutions, and then maybe have additional discussion to make sure we understand correctly. Thank you.
Monica?
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question and I wanted to make a comment. I was under the impression that some of this work was going to be done in the working groups. Is that not correct? Okay. And then, okay, so that was my question. My comment is that, I mean, I agree 100% with what Brandy and Tim were saying. And I don't agree with going to the table to listen to what they have to say, because we already know the way that they're operating because we see it every day, right? And they're going to come to us to say and tell us all the things they can't do. And it is our responsibility to tell them the things that they can do and have those lists available to them so that it's not this back and forth. Like these conversations could have been had and were had, right? A lot of us that are on this call, you know, have been having these conversations at different levels with law enforcement for quite some time. And it's always them coming to us, telling us all the things that they can't do. But if we can look at some of the stuff that's been going on across this country, we can see that a lot of this stuff can be done. And so I do agree that we do need to have a conversation with them, but I think it's too premature right now.
David?
Thank you. I understand the feeling that there is a lot that we already know. I certainly agree with that. But I think having a conversation with the chief and the public safety director can serve us very well, even if all they do is tell us what they can't do. And I don't actually anticipate that's what they will do. My experience in a lot of different kinds of settings that are similar is if you ask for information and you ask open-ended questions, if you start like that, you often come away with surprises as to what people might be willing to do. And I, for one, would like to take the opportunity to see if there's any of that there. I can imagine asking, for instance, what tasks that the police have now would you not like to have? They might come out with 2 or 3 or 4 things or nothing. They might have to say, no, we got it, don't worry, which wouldn't be very satisfactory to me. But based on what I've heard in other conversations, it does seem to me there's a chance we could find points of agreement right off the top. I would always give ourselves the opportunity to do that and to make our jobs easier, to find the low-hanging fruit with them. Because if there are things that we can present as we agree with the police on this, that will have made the exercise worthwhile. Even if for many of the points that they might get asked about, they don't give us anything satisfactory, there still may be fish in the water to be caught. And I wouldn't want to walk away from that opportunity.
Just a note to Dr. Bullock, who is leading the meeting right now. I'm co-chairing, but he's leading this meeting. It is 5 o'clock, and we have a speaker, a very well-renowned speaker that we're very pleased to present that is on pro bono. How's that, Sarah? Or Sharon, how's that? Pro bono, so maybe we should get.
So, if I can say something.
We can discuss it later.
The most important part of this whole conversation is that I don't want to be lulled to sleep by what they will be saying over and over again. Here's a prime example of exactly what happened yesterday or the day before yesterday when they had the Trump rally, right? They received better protection than the protesters that that protested every day. I'm talking about how the police were totally different with
Exactly.
Trump people, and they're not the same with the peaceful protesters that have been going on in Pittsburgh. So, when we start having, when we talk about having a conversation with the chief or Hirsch or whatever, one of the things that I'm always going to keep pushing back, they will try to lull us to sleep by giving us some information that really doesn't go across the board. So I really agree with Brandy, Tim, and Patricia and everybody else that this is something I don't want to be lulled to sleep, and this is something that goes on time and time again when people raise up against injustices that's being put on them. I just want us to be mindful of that.
Let me say this. Let me say this. Let me just say this. The reason why I think it's backward. This is Tim again. I'm sorry, but I'm not. BPEP and some of our community partners are meeting with the mayor, the chief, and the safety director 11 o'clock on Wednesday to follow up a February 24th 2-hour and 15-minute conversation, some of which has been updated by Assistant Chief Bickerstaff. We have 10.5 pages of minutes from that meeting of recommendations, questions, and on June 26, 2016, we had 20 recommendations from BPEP and our partners, which I've sent that letter. And our request on Wednesday is that we get answers to all of that we've already asked for. And after those answers, that can be provided to the task force so we can save some time. And hopefully they will have committed to several things that we've been advocating for years. We don't need to create a wheel that's already been created. We can add to the wheel. The reason why I think the police conversation should be later, after those of us on whatever task force fits, we then present what we think we should be doing, at least the beginning of several action steps and policy changes. And then the chief and the safety director can respond to those. Right now, they're just saying whatever they want to say. And then we're going back and having to go through the process that I just defined that we must do. It's backward. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Tim. We appreciate your comments. Angela?
Yeah, and sorry I keep raising and lowering my hand. It's I'm just so concerned that we are, after 5 o'clock and haven't really made any progress. So if we could come to a decision, either we're going to have the speaker speak or we're going to ask the speaker to come back at a later time when some of us are more prepared with the questions, or this gets taken to a committee, just trying to see if we can move forward.
What is the speaker speaking about? Maybe that would help the topic.
We will be introducing the speaker shortly.
Okay.
I think out of respect to the speaker, we need to let the speaker speak who's scheduled for
I
it.
agree.
I kind of said that.
You did, Valerie. You did.
Thank you.
Obama.
We can talk about this after the speaker.
That's exactly right.
Sharon, will you introduce our speaker today?
Sure, it is my pleasure. So Roy Austin is joining us, and to give you all some sense, I apologize that this wasn't sent out in advance, but Roy is an expert in criminal justice reform, and he has a presentation on police violence in America that is an overview of criminal justice reform efforts from the Rodney King beating until today, and why now, with George Floyd's killing, why this may be the moment that we all hope that it will be, that real change can actually be enacted. So just to give you a quick background on Roy, he has spent much of his 25-year career working on criminal justice issues, and in particular police reform issues. He has held multiple positions at the Department of Justice, and in those positions he prosecuted police misconduct cases and also supervised the expanded use of consent decrees in patterns and practices of unconstitutional policing, which all of you might remember was prominent in the Obama administration and has not been used since. I worked with Roy when he was a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice, and he did such impactful and important work there that he was then asked by President Obama to head up the President's Office of Urban Affairs, Justice, and Opportunity in the White House, which, while he was there, among many other things, he worked on the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So Roy is now a partner at a Washington, D.C. law firm, Harris, Wiltshire, and Grannis. And with this illustrious career he has had, most importantly, I would like to point out that Roy and I both grew up in State College, PA, and are very proud State High alums.
We won't hold that against you.
There you go. Turn it over to you, Roy.
I just wanted to say Hail Pitt real quick. Hail Pitt.
What can I say, Roy?
Well, let me just say that thank you so much, Sharon. And yes, being from State College is huge. I do want to make sure that you know that I do come in peace. I was the fan of the right team growing up in State College, PA. My dad made sure of that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, obviously, police violence in America. It's something which clearly from the discussion that I just heard that you all know a great deal about, sadly, and are very passionate about it. I've come to this really to get rid of some of the rhetoric that we hear around this. And that is, first of all, that it's just a few bad apples that we're talking about. Hopefully, by the time you're done with this presentation, you will understand that that is not true. And then secondly, that we don't know what to do about it. In fact, we have very good idea what to do about police violence in America. We've done it in the past, and there's a lot based on that past that we can move to now. So I want to start in 1991. I want to start in 1991 because this was pretty much the first huge viewing of police brutality that we saw as a nation. Now, police brutality goes back to the slave patrols. It goes to what we saw during Reconstruction. It goes to what we saw in the Civil Rights Movement. But the Rodney King case was the first one that we all saw as a nation. Should start any moment.
As a week of pretrial motions ended today in the case of the 4 Los Angeles policemen already indicted in the Rodney King beating, the county grand jury signaled that will be the extent of the criminal case. 17 of the so-called police bystanders at the beating scene will not be indicted. The which these U.S. Attorney's Office for possible rights violations.
So I present that to you not because any of us needed to see that beating again, but because the effort was concentrated on those 4 officers and what they did. But I would proffer to you that really who we need to talk about is those 7 officers, what happened there. We know for a fact that if a police officer were to see a civilian beating someone the way those police officers did, they would be expected to act, and their failure to act would result in them being dismissed as police officers. Well, the fact that it was police officers that were the lead of this violence should have absolutely no bearing whatsoever on whether or not they should continue to be police officers. And in fact, I would argue that they should not be police officers if you sit there and you watch another officer beat someone. Timeline of the King case, 1991, the day after the video gets released, and very quickly it was announced that those officers would be prosecuted for their conduct. 4 officers ended up going to trial in the case, The federal government then stepped in and it prosecuted the officers. Two of those officers were convicted. They each received 30 months of incarceration. They served 26 of those months. But again, or let me talk about the statute. So the statute they were prosecuted under is United States Code 242. And it's a lot of words here on this screen. Most importantly, though, it is that anybody who commits a crime under color of law, meaning while acting as a police officer, who violates the Constitution, here the Fourth Amendment rights of someone, and they do so willfully. Now, the reason why that willful language is so important is that willful language actually if we look at it, but for that high standard that willfully creates, those cases very well could have been prosecuted by the federal government. If you look at the Justice and Policing Act that the House of Representatives just passed, they've removed that term willfully and they replaced it with recklessly or knowingly, a lower standard, which I think, again, cases like Gamage, Jordan Miles, cases like Eric Garner, Philando Castile could probably have been prosecuted by the federal government had this willful language not been present.
Hey, Roy, can I just interrupt real quick? Your audio is going in and out a little bit.
All right. I am sorry. Is this any better if I get closer, or is it still?
It's totally clear right now, and then it goes out a little. I mean, keep going and we'll let you know. Stay a little closer and we'll let you know. Yeah.
Yeah, let me know if it goes out again.
Okay.
So let's jump to 1994. And in 1994, as a result of the Rodney King case, as part of the crime bill, they created what is known as pattern or practice authority. The authority that allows the federal government what they did was wrong, but they were the bad apples. And then we consider the 17 officers and we say, well, maybe we expand it beyond just the 4 officers. That is systemically violating people's constitutional rights. Again, we have the conduct by law enforcement officers. To prevent any continuation of that violation of someone's constitutional rights or of a community's constitutional rights. Now, Roy,
I'm sorry, it's going out again. I don't know if is there anyone from the mayor's office who can figure out how to fix it?
Let me do this maybe. Whoops, sorry.
Can you share your screen without being on video, Roy?
What I'm thinking I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to go on audio, if that helps.
Sure.
Go on my phone and, sorry, let me.
Take your time.
Let me open it up and go on my phone, and then I'll turn off this audio, so all my audio will be coming through the phone. Sorry about this.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to enter all the digits here. Okay, can you hear me now?
There's a little bit of an echo. Did you mute the computer?
How about now?
Perfect. You guys hear?
Very good.
Okay. You can hear me without the echo?
Yes.
Okay. Let me go back to my screen. Okay. And just let me know if you have any issues, and I apologize for that. Can you hear me?
Volume needs to be turned up.
What's that?
Volume.
If you can get closer to your phone, maybe.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Oh, great.
Great.
Okay. You guys are more than familiar with consent decrees. In 1997, came in and did a consent decree. It was actually its first ever consent decree with the city of Pittsburgh. I note here that it was a 5-page findings letter, and the reason why that is important will come up a little bit later. It was a 83-paragraph consent decree. It covered use of force, it covered searches and seizures, it covered even so far as the use of racial epithets against African Americans in the city. What is very important was at the time this consent decree was put into place is you had Chief Robert McNeely. And what was important about that is that leadership matters. And you had a chief that actually wanted to see this consent decree succeed. He worked hard at making sure that it succeeded. And it was terminated about 5 years after it was entered. It lasted a little bit longer just to clear the backlog of complaints. And so why do I say it worked? Well, I say it worked because you started with a state-of-the-art early warning system. You collected more data than was being collected in other departments. During the time of the decree, what a lot of people complain about is, well, crime's going to go up when you start actually looking at policing and police officers. In fact, crime did not go up. In fact, homicides went down over the time period that the decree was in place. You showed no depolicing, and in fact, it had a positive effect in not increasing the number of African Americans, of blacks that were being arrested by the Bureau of Police. But as David Harris said, David Harris, who is on your task force, is that it did not stick. And that there's something that has to happen after a consent decree goes in place and is effective for it to last. Let's talk a little bit more about this why the bad apples theory of policing is wrong. The person pictured here is a woman by the name of Kim Groves. Kim Groves watched as 2 New Orleans Police Department officers pistol whipped her nephew. And she did exactly what one would want you to do, and that is she reported it to the police. She filed a complaint. Well, it turned out that the police learned about the complaint. One of those officers, a person by the name of Len Davis, contacted a drug dealer who he was providing security for. He contacted that drug dealer, told that drug dealer to get rid of Kim Groves. The drug dealer drove up to Kim Groves as she stood on a street corner and shot her in the face and killed her. So that case, under United States Code 242, was prosecuted by the federal government. The 2 officers and the drug dealer who were involved were all prosecuted. And Officer Len Davis remains the lone African American, actually the first person the Civil Rights Division ever put on death row, who happens to be an African American man. So again, you would see something like this happen in New Orleans, and you would think that the other officers would change their behavior. But instead, they fall into this bad apple statement or rhetoric, and they dismiss the actions of that one officer and do not realize that it's a problem with the entire police department. So the New Orleans Police Department, it turns out, around this time, and this is why the FBI actually had on tape the conversation between Len Davis and the drug dealer, was the FBI was investigating the drug trade in New Orleans and some of the police officers. As a result of their investigation, even though 50 officers were arrested, okay, the vast majority of those officers ended up not being prosecuted, and the investigation into the police department was shut down. Nonetheless, because of such a large number of officers who were involved, there was a decision made to open a pattern or practice investigation into New Orleans. The problem was that the Department of Justice, and this was under then President Bill Clinton, I believe, the Department of Justice decided to let the New Orleans Police Department fix itself. So it told it everything that was wrong in a findings letter. It told it everything that it needed to fix, and it said, go ahead and fix it yourself under an MOU. And history tells us whether or not that was effective. Now, in the same time, we have the Los Angeles Police Department. And the Los Angeles Police Department is going through some very similar things, where we have this crash unit, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums unit. It was the gang unit. This gang unit was involved in every single crime imaginable, from murder to perjury to falsifying paperwork to protecting drug dealers, everything you can imagine. 70 officers were implicated in misconduct. Now, again, some people will say, well, just a few bad apples. When you get to 70 officers, when you get to 50 officers like there was in New Orleans, you're beyond the bad apple. You're on to systemic problems with your police department. And so what happens here? Unfortunately, only 8 officers were convicted of their crimes. 3 of those convictions were overturned. Only 5 officers ended up being terminated. And 12 officers were suspended. Again, if you are a police officer and you have knowledge of or are involved in any kind of misconduct at this level, you no longer need to be a police officer. Nonetheless, a number of them just received some suspensions. So because of the problems in Los Angeles, they also were investigated by the Department of Justice under a pattern and practice theory. 4 years after the investigation started, the Department of Justice finally issued a findings letter. It was a 5-page findings letter, relatively short, about the same size as Pittsburgh's. We're now up to 187 paragraphs. When I say 187 paragraphs, these are what the police department needs to do to get itself acting and operating in a constitutional way. It covered many of the same things that we saw in Pittsburgh, everything from use of force to stops and searches, to how they handled complaints, to how its gang unit was operating, to how you involved the community. Now, for the first 2 years of that consent decree, and I talked about how Chief McNeely took on the consent decree, for the first 2 years of the LA consent decree, basically time was just being wasted. The chief had no interest in trying to move the city forward. Chief Bill Bratton from New York City becomes chief of LAPD. He takes on the consent decree, wants to see it work. 2009, it is terminated, but the judge again says, we're not ready for a complete termination. Let's see how the civilian review group is doing. Give them some years to work on how they are going to keep the actions of the consent decree going. And it's 2013 when it is finally terminated. Now, this timetable tells you how hard it is to reform policing. We're talking about 1996 when DOJ opens the investigation. It's not till 2013 till it is finally terminated completely. That is an incredible length of time, and that is the problem with the culture of policing when it decides it's not going to change fast. But the question remains, did the Los Angeles Police Department consent decree work? And I would argue again, it did work. You had serious use of force falling, fewer officers using force. You have no evidence of depolicing. In fact, the policing got better. You'll learn the terms, if you don't know it already, of a hit rate. And that is how often police departments, when they stop and search someone, they actually find contraband. Instead of just stopping and searching and spreading a wide net in which they captured lots and lots of innocent people. So the policing got better. Serious crime went down during that time. And public satisfaction in the police went significantly up, even in your Black and Latino communities. Nonetheless, I'm not going to say it was perfect, because 10% of your Black residents said there's not a single police officer at LAPD who treated them with respect. And that's a problem when you have a community saying that its police department is not treating them with respect. So now let's move to 2005. So we have New Orleans that was allowed to supposedly fix itself. And then we have Hurricane Katrina come in. Hurricane Katrina uncovered basically so many of the problems that existed in the New Orleans Police Department. in the Danziger Bridge case in 2005, you had a bunch of officers who were on a bridge that was adjacent to the Danziger Bridge. Those officers claimed that they heard gunfire, and they commandeered a Ryder truck. And they drove that Ryder truck over to the Danziger Bridge, jumped out of that truck, and just started shooting. The pictures you see in the upper corner there are of an 18-year-old young man and a 40-year-old man who was severely mentally disabled. The officers killed those two men. And not only did they kill those men, the disabled man, as he was running down the bridge, they shot him in his back. But after they killed him, they threw down a weapon that had nothing to do with this, to say that the family was shooting at the officers, or at least were armed. They created fake witnesses, and then they created fake police reports. So those officers under the statute 242 were prosecuted by the U.S. Department of Justice. They were convicted, received very heavy sentences of 38 to 65 years. Nonetheless, there was an issue with one of the AUSAs who was not involved with this prosecution, making comments in the local newspaper's online comment section. And the judge, who did not like this case to begin with, used that as an excuse to vacate all the sentences. The officers were about to be retried. 5 of them pled guilty, and they received significantly lower sentences of 7 to 12 years. Again, this was a department that had a police officer who was placed on death row, and yet you still have police officers behaving badly. So 2010, a decision was made by then Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez and then AG Eric Holder to conduct an investigation of the New Orleans Police Department, a pattern of practice investigation. We are now at a findings letter that is significantly larger than the findings letter in Pittsburgh, significantly larger than the findings letter in Los Angeles. And we're up to 158 pages worth of evidence saying what is wrong with the New Orleans Police Department. It was a top to bottom review of every aspect, largely every aspect of that police department. And what it found is that 27 out of 27 fatal officer-involved shootings were the deaths, the killing of Black men. That for 6 years, not a single police officer was found to have used excessive force in an officer-involved shooting. That the police department was discriminating on the basis of gender. Basically, when a victim of sexual abuse would go to the police department and say, I was a victim, the police department would ignore the person, or they would convince the person not to file charges, or they wouldn't take any data down on the situation. It was a police department that was broken.
Sorry, you're going in and out a little bit again. You were great for a while. I don't know if you're a little bit away from the phone again.
Okay, well, phone is hopefully right there. I'm going to keep trying.
Okay.
One thing I'm going to try to do is at least take it off of Do Not Disturb and see if that helps. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So you have the timing here of the pattern of practice investigation. The findings letters issued about less than a year later, consent decree signed about a year later. We are now from what was around 80 paragraphs in Pittsburgh to 187 paragraphs in LA. We are now at 490 paragraphs in New Orleans of what New Orleans needs to do. These are just some of the areas that the New Orleans consent decree addressed. Okay, it goes top to bottom. It's how their policies are written. It is how officers are trained, both in academy and at in-service trainings. It is how they use lethal and non-lethal force or less than lethal force. It's how their SWAT teams operate. It's how they deal with people in mental health crisis. It's how they collect data and whether that data is published transparently. It's whether or not people can videotape officers as they are in action in public. It's bias, race, gender, LGBTQ status. It is how they recruit, how they promote officers. It is making sure that officers in New Orleans, we had a problem with officers working second jobs. So they work at the local CVS or they work at the local bank. Those officers then were requiring people to pay them in cash. We had to tell them you cannot have police officers paid in cash. It had to do how they took in complaints. It had to do also with how the officers themselves are dealing with their own stresses. Because at the end of the day, the officers are human beings with the same financial, marital, kids issues that anyone else has, and you have to provide them with support. It covered all of those things. This consent decree is still going on. So is it working? Well, officer-involved shootings fell from 9 to 0. You have dog bites falling from 12 to 0. You have fewer high-speed pursuits through your city, which are extremely dangerous. You have sexual assaults. Now, this is something that a number that you want to go up because you want your population to trust its police department. It goes up from 344 to over 1,100. At the same time, while you've made a better way to file complaints, the number of complaints goes down. So you're seeing significant changes across the board. And then, again, what people complain about all the time is that, well, you're going to do this and you're going to end up with more crime. Well, 2019, in the midst of this consent decree, the lowest homicide numbers in New Orleans in almost 50 years. And those numbers were going down for 3 straight years. So you have better policing, constitutional policing, and lower crime. This can be done. Now, here is one of the problems that we have, just in general. One of the problems that we have is that we have about 1,000 people who are killed by the police each and every year. 1,000 people killed by the police each and every year. And this has become kind of our normal. We just accept that this number is how many people are going to be killed by the police each year. That's a problem. If you look at the percentage below the 26, 26, 28, that's the number of African Americans of those whose races are known who are killed by the police. Remember, African Americans are only 13% of the population. They are clearly disproportionately the victims of police killing. So let's go to 2014. So again, we prosecute the individual officer sometimes who does wrong. We have a pattern of practice regarding the police department, and you expect all the departments to look at this. Here's your roadmap for how to do better. And yet police departments will look at a New Orleans, will look at a Los Angeles, will look at a Pittsburgh and say, well, that's their problem, it's not our problem. And so they don't fix themselves. So after the death of Michael Brown, President Obama sets up a task force on 21st century policing, an incredibly diverse task force of individuals. Diverse in their professional lives, diverse in their races, gender, everything imaginable. So this is Cedric Alexander, a chief from Georgia. This is Lori Robinson, the former head of the Office of Justice Program, the grant-making program for the Department of Justice. This is Chuck Ramsey, former chief of Philadelphia, of DC, high-ranking official in Chicago. This is Brittany Packnett from Black Lives Matter. This is Chief Villasenor from Tucson, Arizona. Not pictured here, Tracy Mears, a professor from Yale. Brian Stevenson of Just Mercy and the Equal Justice Institute. 11 people brought together who held under Ron Davis, who was the head of the COPS office for the Department of Justice, held hearings all across the country, talking to everyone from the police to the community to the business leaders, taking testimony from anybody who wanted to provide testimony. And they came up with 6 pillars. And if you read this document, it's about 60 different recommendations. This is not astrophysics. This is not rocket science. It is common sense. First of all, police officers have to be guardians of their communities, not warriors charging into everything that happens. You have to have clear policies that the officers understand. You have to use, for technology and social media, you have to know how to operate body cameras. You have to use them. You have to use them in the right way. You have to use the latest technology with them. You have to have real community policing, not just police showing up at a community meeting once every quarter. You have to train officers, and you have to train to what are the top ways to train people, not just sitting in a classroom. And again, you have to look at officer wellness and safety. How do you provide for the officers themselves? So then we go to 2017, and there's an election in 2017. And one of the first things that happened after Donald Trump was elected is the Fraternal Order of Police sent Donald Trump's campaign a wish list of the things that they wanted to see. And I have to tell you, there are few more offensive lists that a police department, that a set of police officers can send an administration than the list that the Fraternal Order of Police sent to the Trump administration. But what you've seen is the Trump administration basically ticked down this list. So it's everything from, we had limited the military equipment that police officers, that police departments could get. They reversed that order. For some reason, the Fraternal Order of Police felt that they should weigh in on DACA. Thankfully, the Supreme Court decided otherwise. The Fraternal Order of Police, the rank and file police union, is talking about increasing the use of private prisons. Again, not clear why, but it tells you something about the attitude of the Fraternal Order of Police to change and how policing should be done. But almost more offensively, they took those common sense recommendations and they told the Trump administration that we should get rid of those recommendations. And really offensively is they even went so far as to say that the ban on racial profiling should be lifted. A President Bush-era ban on profiling should be lifted. Not clear why any police officer should be advocating against or advocating for any form of racial profiling. But that's the side the Fraternal Order of Police took. I would note the Fraternal Order of Police was started in Pittsburgh, I understand. So talk about where the culture starts. And then you have a president that is emboldening bad behavior by police. You may remember how he talked about how police officers should remove their hand from the head of an arrestee so that the person's head can hit the side of a car. So offensive, in fact, that police department where this happened had to put out a statement that you should never have to get from a police department after a president speaks, saying that we will not tolerate roughing up prisoners. And then more recently, you had the president talking about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Now, I don't give the president credit for knowing the civil rights context of that statement, but it is an absurd statement that for a robbery, you're going to encourage someone to be shot. That is an absurd statement coming from anybody, especially a president. But it is that kind of behavior, those kinds of words that are emboldening our police officers to do the wrong thing. And that's how you get to something like this. That's how you get an officer casually with his knee snuffing out the life of a man who is telling him that he can't breathe, who is crying out for his dead mother. His knee there for at least 8 minutes. And you have 3 officers who hear this and are afraid to do anything and just allow this to happen and stand there and watch and guard as this is happening. That is a problem. So we talk about a few bad apples, and I told you at the beginning that is a misnomer, it is a problem that we use that language when we're dealing with policing. We're talking about 85,000 cops investigated for misconduct. And that number is not even capturing all of the bad behavior because misconduct, you can't get misconduct reports publicly in numerous departments. They are not properly investigated. There is simply no accountability in most instances for bad behavior on the part of law enforcement, and that has to change. You have police officers on social media. This was something done by the Plain View Project, where they looked at 6 cities, the public postings by law enforcement, the most vile, racist, sexist, violent posts that one can imagine. And it's being put out by police officers. I would offer to you that they should not be police officers if they feel that way about the communities where they are supposed to be protecting and serving. You have unbelievable amounts of sexual misconduct on the part of law enforcement officers. Close to 400 officers in a 3-year period who were arrested for sexual misconduct. Arrested for sexual misconduct. That's not even saying how many instances there were. That is a problem with someone who's given the power and the authority of a police officer. You have a police officer just the other day in New York reporting fellow police officers, talking about how they're framing innocent people. And when this happens, you end up getting these convictions reversal. People were spending time in jail based on the testimony of corrupt police officers, which means they probably should have never been in jail in the first place. And once you go to jail, once you go to prison, your chances of succeeding in life decrease substantially. And so lives are being ruined on the backs of corrupt policing. And even at the federal level, you have the head of the Park Police, the current head of the Park Police, where there are credible complaints about an illegal body cavity search in public and of perjured testimony. And yet he is the head of law enforcement for the U.S. Park Police. So where do we go from here? What do we do from here? Well, first of all, we need to talk a little bit just about crime in this country. And so the question is, well, will crime go up if we actually try to do something and make police more accountable? But I would say to you that we have a crime problem here that is not being solved by all the money that we are pouring into policing. If you look at that second row with the 14,000 to 17,000, that's the number of murders that happen in the United States. That crosses the Obama administration and the Trump administration. And if you look below, that's the rate per 100,000. To go from 4.5 to 5.4 and back to 5.0, I would say to you, we are not dealing with our crime problem. We keep doing the same thing. We keep putting more resources into policing, and we're not having an appreciable impact on crime in this country. And if you look at the numbers below that, those are the violent crime numbers. And again, they barely move over time. And we keep pouring money into policing. So we need to come up with a different solution if we're going to have a different result with respect to crime in this country. And to be more specific here in Pittsburgh, okay, you have an amazing drop in homicides in Pittsburgh. That's your second row right there. But where is that going? If you look at Allegheny County, you have it pretty flat. So we have a border, and we have fewer deaths in one part of that border, but it's just ending up right across the street. That's a problem. We are not having an appreciable difference in violent crime in this country. We're not having an appreciable difference of violent crime in Pittsburgh. And if you look at that percentage there on the third row, that's the clearance rate of homicides. Okay, so we're arresting all these people for low-level offenses, and the most violent crime, homicides, we clear 60% one time. That's a problem. So where do we go from here? That's why we are seeing what the New York Times has noted as the greatest protest movement in the history of this country. That's why people are demanding change, and they're right to demand change. Because police departments cannot fix themselves. It's more than a few bad apples. There's more that we have to do in this country if we are, in fact, going to live up to our promise of fair and equitable and safe lives for everyone. Thank you for your time. I will answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Austin, for that comprehensive overview. I'll open the board to members of the task force. If you have questions for Mr. Austin.
Angela.
Angela?
I didn't have my hand raised.
On there.
Okay.
Yeah, undo it then.
If I may, if I may,
Trying to some more ice.
So I actually do have a question for you. This is Patricia. Hi, Roy. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. So it's not really a question as much as it is a statement. First, thank you very much for your presentation, for the honesty in it, and all the data that you presented. It is very informative and fantastic of you to do that. So thank you. My comment and kind of a question is, where is the data regarding sexual misconduct? You know, in 35 states, including Pennsylvania, there is a bill currently waiting to be passed in Harrisburg, hopefully it will, where that it is completely legal for police to have non-consensual sex, really, with someone who is in their custody. I know that we're talking a lot about police brutality, but I think that would fall along the lines of police brutality in its own way. If that is included in your data, then fantastic. If not, would you see something like that, including the numbers, increasing it? Is there anything that you've seen where any type of misconduct like that has been, there's been things implemented by the police in those different states to bring an end to that? Is it as simple as changing the law? I apologize if I don't have like a clear thought for my sentence. I'm just taken aback by the knowledge that that's not illegal here.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is one of the most obvious, it is one of the most obvious changes that we have to make in laws across this country. There is no reason why a police officer should be able to have sexual contact with someone who they have in custody. There's no reason.
Yes.
And so, yes, changing the law is a start as to what needs to happen. So, but we have to change the culture, because I'm telling you, when you have 4 officers watching, when you have 17 officers watching 4 officers beat someone, not only do you want them to stop that from happening, you want them to intervene. You want them to report their fellow officers, and it just doesn't happen in policing. And I know New Orleans has what is right now considered a model program for police officers to intervene when they see bad conduct on the part of fellow officers. This doesn't happen in secret. Officers know when other officers are bad officers. There's just no way for them to step in to make sure that that this conduct doesn't continue.
So if I may, thank you, Mr. Austin, for your presentation. The one thing that stood out to me through your whole presentation was how when we did have a consent decree, we had the feds that were watching over all the police activities that were going on. So what I gathered from this whole thing that you presented is really that we really had to have a whole better oversight on the police. Now, the second thing that isn't known or could be known by some of the folks that's on this call is that the police have their own private website. The Blue Knights. And some of the things that are said on it. It's a private website or social media that only a select part of the police force has, and I'm going to say it, that it's mostly all white folks who are on this website. It's about the culture. If we really going to change, if this is what I want us to really be about, is changing the culture, because that's what you keep talking about, culture change. And who is the one, and I guess everybody's scared of the feds. When the feds come in, that's when things that start to change.
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Richard. A couple of things to unpackage there. Number one is you've got to do the deep dive. You need to understand how the police are currently policing. And you got to look at all aspects of it, from the very basic policies to how their training operates. And I know that this takes a long time, and I heard your conversation beforehand. There's frustration in going in there and spending the time to do that. But at some point, some experts have to go in there and look and see how they're doing every aspect of policing. And then the second part of it is, how do you make sure that there is oversight? Oversight with teeth. I mean, there are lots of civilian review panels. Do they have subpoena power? Are they able to institute discipline on officers? Are they able to change policies when they see something going wrong in real time? How do you create that body to make sure that policing is happening right? And these are things that have to be defined by the community. The community has to determine how they want to be policed. It is not for some outside person to decide how Pittsburgh should be policed. It's for Pittsburgh to decide that. And so you have to find ways to make sure that that happens, but there have to be repercussions for bad conduct, and that simply doesn't happen in policing right now. in part because, you know, a union that is willing to put out a document saying that we should end the ban on racial profiling is an organization that clearly does not want any officers to be held accountable for bad behavior. And that's a real problem. Thank you for your question, Richard.
Nathaniel?
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. Thank you as well, Mr. Austin, for your presentation. It was really helpful. Could I ask you, when you look at the consent decrees from New Orleans and Pittsburgh and other situations that you assessed and looked at over the course of your career, what prevented the consent decrees from sticking? And I'd be curious to know specifically for Pittsburgh, and what needs to happen to prevent these from being lifted going forward? Where were the shortfalls?
So with Pittsburgh, you have the foremost expert in Professor Harris to talk to you about kind of what has happened. But the bottom line is political leadership changed in Pittsburgh. Political leadership changed in Pittsburgh, which no longer felt the need to ensure that the police bureau there was acting above board in all cases. It was more interested in looking tough at crime. It was more interested in currying favor with the police union than it was in making sure there was fair and equitable policing. And then you bring in a chief who is not as strong and is not as committed to this. And then the culture just falls back into place where you have a bunch of people. And look, police officers are, again, human beings who want to, when they join the force, for the most part, they want to do the right thing. But when you give any human being that amount of power with no accountability, it's going to happen. And once you lose those systems of accountability, once you lose that oversight, once you lose that strong leadership, is when police departments start acting poorly again. And so many of you have heard the phrase, culture eats policy for breakfast every morning. But that's what happens here. The culture of policing, no matter how good your policies are, if you don't have adequate oversight and accountability, are going to fall right back into the culture of over-policing certain neighborhoods, under-policing other neighborhoods, using excessive force, the same problems. And so I believe that's what happened in Pittsburgh. There was a change in leadership, a change in political leadership, and a loss of accountability, discipline, and kind of the regular order.
Thank you.
David? You're muted.
He's muted.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for being patient. I really appreciate you coming to speak to us, Roy. It was very, very helpful. And I would agree with the last thing you said. There was simply a change in administrations. In fact, there were two. And you went through a couple of police chiefs, and we ended up with Chief Harper, who was not empowered, even if he had been interested in keeping the consent decree vital. And it just fell apart, just like you described. There has to be a commitment from the top to make those things work that is sustained over a long period of time, and that simply disappeared. What I was going to ask is, in a way, to reinforce Richard's comment about culture, because that is the key to all of this. You mentioned a New Orleans program that I'd like you to enlarge upon just a little bit. I think you were referring to the EPIC program. This is the ethical policing program that has been so successful in New Orleans. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
So I am not an expert on the program, because the program actually started happening after I was no longer a part of the consent decree. It's something which I would actually, it is the judge in the case, a federal judge, independent of the Department of Justice, independent of the police department, loves this program. What it does is it provides, first of all, training on police officers on what they should do if they see misconduct by a fellow officer, but it also provides room for those police officers to report that misconduct. And there's no one who is closer to police misconduct than fellow police officers. And so once you create a system and a space for a police officer who, again, quite oftentimes wants to do the right thing, but knows that they will be destroyed if they are found to have reported a fellow officer for any level of misconduct by both the union and by even non-union fellow officers, So you have to create a program for the police to be able to do that. And so that is the EPIC program in very, very brief, but I think it's something that you in Pittsburgh should certainly study and see if it is something that could work or something like that. I mean, the EPIC program is kind of first of its kind at that level. So at this point, there's probably something even better that Pittsburgh could do with a program like that.
Patricia?
Oh, sorry, that was raised by accident. Thank you.
Oh, you passed? I'm sorry, Amanda? Amanda? You passed, Amanda?
Yes, I'm here. No, I'm here. Thank you. Just hitting the wrong button. I apologize. And thank you for the presentation. More of an observation and maybe a question in it as well. But when your presentations in the beginning had the Rodney King beating and the results of that, we're not talking about the racism, right? The racism at the root of all of this. And for whatever programs, for whatever trainings there are, it still doesn't touch upon the racism inherent in what's happening. And if we remember, for those of us who were alive at that time, there was Rodney King being beaten by police, and he was described as having this animal-like strength, as we have to treat people who look like this like animals because they are animals and they'll overtake us. And if that's at the root of how we're going to be treated, then what's getting at that?
Mm-hmm. So, look, I don't think I used the word racism in my presentation, but I definitely talked about the impact that bad policing has on African Americans, and it is enormous. And you know, part of that is who the police officers are. I don't know how diverse the police department is in Pittsburgh. That is not in itself a solution, given the cliche blue before black that some people often say. But it is part of it, is having a diverse police force. Having people who grew up and understand the city, understand the community, want to be a part of that community, want to be guardians of that community, is a part of it. But there's no question, but police officers are just, that there's race involved in this decision making, but police officers are just doing the same thing that everybody else does, but they have more power, okay? So it's the same thing we see in our educational system, it's the same thing we see in our employment system, it's the same thing we see when a person clutches their purse when a young black man walks by them. It's the same thing that we see everywhere else, but the police actually have the power to do something. And do something meaning to be over-aggressive when they're arresting them, to follow innocent people. I mean, this is a problem with the hit rate. This is the problem with kind of how police operate in the world of drugs, is they are supposed to be able to figure out who is suspicious and then act very, very quickly and aggressively toward that person. Well, the problem is probably a good 90% of the time they're wrong. And then you're destroying a community, and you're basing that on, well, that looks like a young black man. His pants are down. He's wearing a hoodie. He's doing whatever. He's going to be aggressive. He's probably a drug dealer. If he's not a drug dealer, so what if I arrest him? So what if I search him? I'll let him go at the end of that. So, but these are all the same problems that we see in society writ large across all of our systems. And again, the problem with policing is that they have a gun, they have a right to use that gun, and they have less accountability when they do so.
This is Tim Stevens. Some of you on the call may not realize, Brandy, you still here?
Yes, I'm still here.
Brandy and I worked on a police reform package out of the Jordan Miles situation, out of the Jordan Miles police reform legislation. 4 things happened out of that. We got the commitment from the city to have videos in the cars. We had the commitment to have body cams. It took a little while to get that. They started with the bike police, and now it's system-wide. We got a commitment for an extensive annual report, which is much more extensive than in the past. The fourth piece, though, this is something that I personally advocated strongly for. The consent decree, Mr. Austin, ended on Friday the 13th, 2002 in federal court. I was there. It was started with the NACP, which I was president at the time, and Vic Volchek from the ACLU, Parents Against Violence. It was a 5-year plan that ended on the 13th, 2002. When we had the Jordan Miles situation, which occurred January 12th, 2010, one of the things that we pushed for was the codification of the consent decree. And we got City Council to agree to do so. Nate Harper at first resisted, then he later said, well, maybe that's what we should do. My request of Mr. Austin and David Harris, would you review, we have a 4-piece legislation package. And at one point, our Citizen Police Review police director mentioned that we had 21 meetings just to finish that package. It took at least a year and a half, maybe 2.5 or a year and a half to complete the package. What I want to know is, would either or the two of you review that last piece of legislation to ensure that, in fact, all of the policies and procedures of the consent decree were, in fact, copied into the legislation package of, I believe it was 2013. Because we were the first consent decree in the nation. And we want to make sure what was committed was, in fact, codified. Because what I said was, we don't want to depend on who the mayor is or who the police chief is, that these policies and procedures are being pursued and implemented ongoingly. Is there an answer between Mr. Austin and David Harris?
So let me just answer, and that is that as good as I think the Pittsburgh police consent decree was, we're in a different world right now. The world post George Floyd allows you to do more about policing than many of us who've been working on this for decades. And I'm not gonna age David. David is probably about 20, 25, but older people like myself have been working on. We are in a whole different world right now. And I think first and foremost, instead of looking at what was done in Pittsburgh, I would look at the most recent consent decree, which is Baltimore. And I would see whether or not you're doing those things. And then I would take a step further and look at what is in the Justice and Policing Act, because that is the furthest reaching piece of legislation that I have ever seen on dealing with policing. This is the U.S. House Act. And so I wouldn't just go back to what was done in Pittsburgh in '95, but I would go to what is being done now. And I think you could probably even go further.
I have to agree with Roy. I mean, I see no reason that we would even want something that nails us to what was state of the art. It was in 1997 to 2002. There's more that can be done.
Let's see some more questions. Nathan?
Yes, thank you. Tim actually alluded to this. My question was going to be, what steps, in your opinion, Mr. Austin, can or should be taken so that our city and the citizens of our city are protected when there is a change in administration, absent either state legislative or federal legislative actions being taken, laws being passed, in order to prevent every administration there's a change and the consent decree gets lifted or what have you. What steps would you suggest?
You have to do it in the form of whatever the civilian review panel is, and whoever you put on that, and give them terms that outlast the politics of this. But it has to have teeth. It has to be able to dig in and look at the investigations that are done on how it's got to be able to discipline officers. It's got to have real authority and that body will outlast any kind of political wins. But that's the only thing I can think of. In addition to kind of codifying some of the changes and making them part of law, and that the only way you can change them is by some very transparent vote. But even so, it is the day-to-day activities of police that have to be looked at by a body that has full-time authority to look at those things and to insist on changes. Because the other thing is policing is just changing. I mean, we weren't talking about body cameras in '95 and '97. That wasn't even a thought. We're at body cameras now. We're at drones now. We're at data collection and transparency that we never imagined. We are at computers and cars now. We're at less lethal weapons that we didn't even know about then. They have now, sound guns that can basically knock a person off their feet with sound. So we're in a place now that in a profession that is moving as fast as technology moves. And so you need a body that can keep up with that.
Great, thank you.
Patricia?
One question that I have for you is, how would you go about forming a conversation with the Fraternal Order of Police? Because, and based on what I saw in your presentation, that is really a huge issue, is the FOP in of itself. And it was started here in Pittsburgh. We will meet with them next Monday. And how would you go about that conversation? And also, may we please have a copy of your presentation to keep on our drive?
So, yeah, I will give you a copy of my presentation. I'll give it to Sharon, and she can distribute it however she wants to. Look, I think, first of all, you have to at some point ignore the rhetoric that comes from some of the leadership in the Fraternal Order of Police, and you somehow have to start talking to the officers themselves. Because I have found that when I'm talking to officers themselves, and let me be clear, I've prosecuted officers, and the people who supported me in that prosecution of officers who did my investigation were very, very good officers. And I was a prosecutor in Washington, D.C., and I've been surrounded by very good officers. So there are officers out there who want to do the right thing, and they can't in this current environment. So you have to provide space and room for them to come in and have honest conversations with you. We've seen in a number of cities, I don't know if Pittsburgh has this, but your black officers often don't join your FOP. They create their own organization. I have to tell you, across the nation, only 12% of officers are women. You need to have a serious sit down with female officers and hear how they are oftentimes much better at policing than are the male officers, because they realize that they don't want to get into a fist fight with somebody across from them, okay? They want to figure out a way to de-escalate the situation, to handle the situation, because there's no reason to get into a fist fight over, where you have a lot of male officers who feel like, you know what, if I don't get into a fight today, I haven't done my job. But you have to get past the leadership. You have to get, in some ways, and I know that this is an open and transparent task force, but you need to find ways to have those private conversations with officers to hear what it is that they want, because they know what's wrong with their police departments. They know the officers who are racist and sexist, who are using force too often. They know who those people are. And they will tell you, as long as they don't lose their jobs or lose their careers, or in some cases lose their lives because they've reported on fellow officers. And so find a way to create that space and bring them to the table and force those and then force the union to get up in front of people and explain why it is they need 48 hours to give a statement after a shooting that they're involved in, when they won't give that to any other human being. Why is that? Why do you need to have multiple boards determining discipline after the chief has already decided that the officer should be disciplined? Now, I'm a big progressive. I'm a big liberal. I love unions. But the police union has been given too much power because they have too much money and too many members, and they are protecting their own. They're doing what anybody would do if they were given that kind of power and authority. Well, that needs to be taken from them, the ability to form agreements on how a misconduct investigation is run. They deserve due process. They deserve the same rights as anybody else who's being investigated, but they don't deserve more rights than everybody else. But have them get in front of the people of Pittsburgh and explain to them why they need to have more rights than everybody else. I don't think they can explain that. And then you start working at it from there.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
We have 3 more, then we will have to end this conversation. We have Tony, David, and Sharon. Tony?
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Austin, for your presentation. Kind of building on the last comment about, some of the accountability and transparency, have you seen where the conversation and the expectations is clearly articulated to the communities so that they're able to hold that level of accountability towards elected officials who will then hold it towards law enforcement? But it also seems like it might be a good way to, change the culture, because officers will feel a little bit more protected that the community has these expectations. So I have to do this because I'm going to be held accountable for the community. But have you seen where that's worked well, engaging the community in this larger discussion?
Yeah, and it's not easy. And everybody in the community has, they have their own financial worries, their own family worries. They're just trying to get to the next ball game. They're just trying to, feed folks in their families. And so getting people to pay attention to this is difficult. But we are in a moment right now where it is easier than it's ever been to get people's attention around policing and law enforcement and fairness and equity and having those conversations. But part of it is finding ways to go to the community and to take all the different groups in the community. You need to bring the faith community to the table and have one of these sessions with the faith community and let them testify and let them tell you what's happening. You need to do it with the business community. You need to do it with the disability community, with the LGBT community, with the Black community, with the Latino community. You need to create space for open and honest conversation with different parts of your community, and you have to go to them. You have to make it as easy as possible, and you have to go to them. And you have to be prepared with facts, and at the same time, listen to them. Listen to what they're saying. Look, you have to go to your wealthy communities and your less wealthy communities. Ask the wealthy communities what it is that they want, what they need, what they expect from their policing. Ask the less wealthy community what they want, what they need, what they see from their policing. It's a long, difficult, thoughtful process. But if you give people voice, then whatever you as a task force come up with at the end is going to be accepted, because you open the door for all of them. And you're going to have, a half dozen people listening to this task force meeting, but you're going to just keep building your circles of people who you touch. And you have to touch the entire community for them to listen. And some are not going to listen, but most want to see public safety enhanced. They want to see fairness. They want to see less racial strife. They all want to see this. And so if you go to them, if you put in the time, you may have to break yourselves up into different groups, because I know all of you have other jobs. But you've got to bring them to the table. You got to hear them out. You got to provide them with, a presentation that tells them honestly what is happening in policing in Pittsburgh. That's my gut on it. And that was successful in New Orleans for us. We talked to everyone. We brought FOP to the table. They actually did not dislike our consent decree, because we heard what they wanted: better policies, better training. They thought the promotion system was awful. They thought that they had supervisors who were abusing their authority. They wanted to go home at the end of their shift safe. They actually wanted to see change, but they couldn't get out there publicly and say it, but they could to a small group of us privately. And we made that a part of the consent decree and part of our findings.
Great, thank you, that's helpful.
David?
I do have a question, but I think Sharon was first, if you'd like to go,
Sharon.
It's Roy, thank you so much. I know we've kept you for much longer than I told you we were going to keep you today, but obviously this task force is getting a lot out of hearing your thoughts. I just wanted to ask you, I know all about consent decrees and things that have been wrapped into those, but in terms of the idea of unbundling, which seems to be gaining steam in a lot of cities, do you have either examples that you know of other cities who have done this successfully in, building out other community resources, so to take some of the pressure off of the police to handle things they're not trained to handle?
So this is a hard one, and in many ways a new one, because I think the feeling has always been give the police more resources to do things. I would use, Sharon, our example from Justice Reinvestment from DOJ. So the idea that if we save money on incarceration and we incarcerate fewer people, where do we transfer that money to? And I think JRI was something that we did at DOJ, Sharon, that could be a useful starting point for this. Though in policing, this is a different conversation. The other piece that jumps off the page is CIT, so crisis intervention training. So how do you team up, maybe at first, a police officer and a social worker when the call comes in for someone who's in crisis? Start with a team up. There you're using fewer police resources than you would if you send in, 4 police officers. I don't think your social workers necessarily all want to go into these situations right now without some kind of cover. But someone there to both talk down and de-escalate the situation and someone to provide protection. Okay, you're going to start to see ways that you can reduce the heavy hand of policing if you start a program like that. I think Portland is the first place that we did kind of an exclusive crisis intervention program. The other place is your schools, what to do with school resource officers. It's a place to lower the temperature, maybe lower the footprint of police, while at the same time, we have to recognize that many of our urban schools need some kind of protection from drugs and guns and weapons. But what does that look like if it's someone other than an armed officer? And can someone other than an armed officer be your primary person who's involved with that in your schools? So I think you have to pick this, you have to look at different places where police operate. I think there's a huge question as to what do you do about drug interdiction, because so much of policing is around how they do drug interdiction. And I think communities have to decide what they want to do with that. And I don't have an answer, but that's huge resources expended on jump out squads and by bus and all these different things with really pretty low hit rates, and a decision to ignore your majority white or your wealthier neighborhoods. Because we know that the statistics show that Black people do not use drugs any more than white people, but your police operations always happen in your high crime areas, which always seem to be your Black neighborhoods. So a real decision has to be made on how you're going to do drug enforcement, and that will lower the footprint or reduce the footprint of police that you may need, depending on what decisions are made around that. But those are my quick thoughts on it.
David?
Yes, thank you. I wonder if you would speak just for a minute about a particular aspect of use of force. This is one of the key concepts here. There are commentators, Chuck Wexler and others, who talk about shootings that are awful but lawful. And we have we've begun to see use of force law change at the state level, even if the Supreme Court will never change it. We've got the first few state level jurisdictions making these kinds of changes. Our legislature has had a pending bill for over a year now, introduced by a representative or two from our very county that has it's just sitting. And I guess my question is, do you see any reason that a city cannot make by its own law, dictate policy to its police department that sets its own use of force standard? Is there any reason that we, Pittsburgh, could not pass a bill just like Summer Lee's, she's the representative, if we decided that was good for us?
David, I actually don't know the answer to that question as far as because the statute that officers would be prosecuted under are state statutes. I know there are municipal codes. I don't know that I've ever seen a municipal code that deals with deadly force, but I'm not sure that they're there couldn't be one. And I
I'm
know
less
Chris
interested.
Rapp,
I apologize. I'm less interested in the question of prosecution than in setting the policy for the police department. My apologies.
yeah. Okay, well, without question, I mean, Pittsburgh could set a policy that requires that deadly force can only be used as a last resort and start training their officers on that. That requires that you take steps toward de-escalation first. That requires that you intervene if you see a fellow officer doing something that is improper. You can certainly do that by way of policy, and you can certainly do that by way of training. And by the way, you have to get rid of all of these side training programs that police officers go to. You basically have to ban them from going to all these kind of warrior schools that they go to, where they unlearn the stuff that the department is trying to teach them. And then if you make it part of discipline, at least part of it has to be that immediately when you have an officer violating one of these policies, they're off the force. And so that is the kind of stuff that you can do by way of policy, and not sit around waiting for legislation. But you know, you can get rid of, and this is what all the early warning systems do, is they tell you when an officer is acting badly. If you change the discipline system, you can terminate those officers more quickly. And that's something that you can do at the city level. And that may be something that needs to be done while waiting for the state to catch up.
Thank you.
But I can tell you, Center County, being the best county in Pennsylvania, probably has this figured out already. I'm just guessing, considering how great Center County is.
And on that note, we should probably let you go.
We did have one more. Patricia, did you have a question, or was your hand just still raised?
Well, after that comment that someone just made about whatever county that is, I'm kidding. Excuse me. No, I was going to just ask you, just circling back for what you said about trainings, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because a lot of Pittsburgh police, and I don't know exact numbers, train with the Israeli Defense Force for counterterrorism. And it's something that is probably not publicly known. I know it because I'm Jewish, and our community takes pride in that for some reason. And I know that a lot of outside trainings happen, but how the police are trained, is that something that we would be privy to, or would we need to ask the police? And is there any way to fact check that?
Well, let me tell you, I mean, the one thing, you can't do your jobs unless you have complete access to everything that the police department is doing. They cannot be keeping things secret from this task force, for this task force to do its job. So I would say you should be able to ask that question and get an answer from them. And if they don't know where their officers are going and receiving training, then there you have a very clear and obvious problem. Another thing that I've learned more about recently is that police unions sometimes pay officers who are put on unpaid leave. Okay, that's a practice that needs to end, because then that officer is receiving paid vacation time for being disciplined, and that's a real problem. And so these are questions that need to be asked for you to get answers for. But yeah, you can't do your job unless the police department. And I heard a discussion over whether or not you talk to the chief. Not to weigh in too much on your private discussions, but yeah, you should bring the chief in next week, and you should bring him in the week after that, and the week after that. There's no reason not to have multiple conversations with the police chief. And you know, you listen, you hear the chief out, but you have to do your own digging and your own research.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And one other thing is, I hope you could shine some light on this. So the FOP makes the determination of, they advocate for officers, even if they've been disciplined. Do they also advocate for officers to be rehired in other areas? Do you know that?
The national FOP. The national FOP.
Yeah, the national FOP.
Yeah, they seem to be involved in kind of the not creating a true list of officers who have been disciplined, so that officers have freedom to leave and join other departments. I don't know how much they weigh in on an individual case, but the general policy of us not having a national database of officers who have been disciplined is certainly the work of the FOP.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Bullock, Tim seems to have a quick one for Mr. Austin. If he would not mind sending us, in his opinion, the key summary points of his presentation. I know you agreed to share the entire presentation, but if you could summarize the key points that you think this illustrious task force should consider for Pittsburgh.
Roy, I don't
So
want to add more to your plate. We've already taken up so much of your time.
So,
And
I am happy to have. I'm happy to have future conversations with you. I'm probably not going to take on another written assignment right now, and I apologize for that. But I do have a group of colleagues who wonder why I'm even doing this stuff all the time. So I do want to. I apologize, but I'll send you the presentation. I'm happy to have a conversation.
All right.
Mr. Austin, we want to extend our great appreciation for the time and effort that you have put forth this evening to talk to the task force, to provide data, open conversation, and offer some suggestions that we as a task force should consider as we go forward with our work. So I want to extend my thanks and appreciation for you taking the time, and also thank our task force member, Sharon Werner, for mentioning your name and the value that you would bring to the group and helping us to look at a national picture as we zone in on the work we're going to do in Pittsburgh. So thank you very much.
And
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Roy.
Sharon is fantastic. She's been in the trenches. She knows this stuff backward and forward. And David Harris is someone who I have been reading since I was a very, very small child.
Wow.
You have, oh yeah, he's been around. He's been around for a long time, that David Harris guy. So, but anyway, good luck.
He's
And
like 24.
I really appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm much, much younger than that. With that, I'll see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Roy.
Roy.
Thank you.
Well, task force members, I do hope you enjoyed the presentation and discussion and a chance to have a broader view of the work that we are working on. It is not easy, but one thing he did say, which I hope you agree, is there's value in bringing in representatives of our community to ask questions, let them also see our investment in them so that we get their buy-in support. And the recommendations that we take forth are backed by constituents across the entire region versus one or two that may have had the loudest voice to be heard and provide facts to make it to a report. So I appreciate your patience in allowing the speaker. I apologize also for not getting this out. I left on Friday during my vacation. In fact, I'm on vacation now. And I didn't get online until today. So I didn't get the time to go on and do the formal agenda like I normally do, but I will make a greater effort to get that out in the future before our meeting. Valerie, do you have any comments?
There was a lot that he had, and Sharon, the one thing he couldn't touch upon because it's probably the hottest topic, and me and Brandy had a convo. It's arbitration, how cops get back on, and a couple of things I wanted to just mention to the group as thoughts is that two things. One is to possibly get an update from our state legislators or somebody from the state as to the status of things in the state. What changes can we advocate for that would impact our recommendations? It may enhance it, I don't know. The other thing is, in talking with the mayor, he acknowledges the oversight of having anyone from the faith-based community. on board. We just not too many years ago, we had a tragedy at the Tree of Life. So we've got, and then there's people that have been in the trenches that are from the faith-based community that are doing great things in the community, working with police, holding them accountable, etc. So those are two things, Dr. Bullock, that I'd like to bring up as far as engaging that constituency either separately or infused with other committees that you have, but whether this, those are just some on the ground presentations. As we kick off with a national expert, maybe we can start drilling down into where we're at.
Very good recommendations. I see a hand. Angela, did you raise your hand, or was that up from before?
No, I just raised my hand. I know our time is short, so just wanted to get a sense of next steps. I know we have the subcommittees. I would like to propose that we get those finalized so those committees can start to meet. I'm also, I'm willing to volunteer to convene the unbundling committee. I know we had talked about the fact that there are more subcommittees than we probably have enough people to put them on, and we had talked about tiered systems. Wasn't sure where we were in terms of which ones are coming out. I know use of force is a primary one, and hiring and training is also a key one that needs to be addressed. So in the short bit of time that we have, just wanted to get a sense of next steps. And then if you could clarify the process on speakers, like I know I'd sent my suggestions to you and Valerie, whereas some sent them to the whole group. So some clarification there as well.
In regards to the subcommittees, my goal was to have finalized it last Thursday. On Thursday, when we received the report, we had only 8 respondents. Out of those 8 respondents, it covers all of the subcommittees, and I would like to have everyone respond. The goal was to then empower each subcommittee to begin to review the data, the research, invite speakers to their various committees to begin the work, and then we would report back to the larger committee. This would allow us to do more intimate conversations and to dive down deep into the discussion that would help address each one of those areas, as well as expand the area. So we can start with the ones that we have, and unbundling, in fact, is one of the fullest categories. So that group can start. Recruitment, hiring, education, workforce training also has 4 members. Use of force has 2. Eliminate racial profiling and racial injustice has 2. Accountability, transparency, satisfaction surveys has 4. Transforming Pittsburgh culture has 1. Office of Wellness has 1. Relations with Pittsburgh Fraternal Order of Police has 2. And 8 Can't Wait has 1. And that's why I was asking if everyone would indicate the areas that they would like to work on, then that would help us to expedite the subcommittees. But based on the ones that do have, I'm sorry, based on the subcommittees that do, unbundling can proceed, and that membership based on the current registration includes David Harris, Camille Redmond, Sharon Werner, Nathaniel Yap, Angela Reynolds, Patricia Leftwich, Monica Ruiz, and Bobby Gear. So that group can, and I'll send it out to you in an email so you can see the members and you can begin that conversation. And thank you, Angela, for agreeing to lead that group.
Dr. Bullock?
Yes.
It seems like, and maybe I'm misreading, I was looking through the notes a couple times today. It seems like there should be a subcommittee on reviewing legislative proposals and legislation that has already been passed in anywhere in this country and in this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and suggestions of action proposals that have already been in existence for people to review and see what they think is acceptable, reasonable for Pittsburgh.
The legislation that you're referencing falls across each one of these subcommittees. There's a greater value for the subcommittees to approach the legislation specific to the areas that they're working in. Then it has the meat and the content that you're bringing forth with the report to help explain and justify the action that you are wanting to bring forth. If I'm misunderstanding that, I would like to hear other committee members to speak up.
Anyone?
David?
I think, Dr. Bullock, I think your approach makes sense because there's going to be legislation in a lot of different areas. And for instance, there's a whole raft of use of force legislation that's out there. That committee should look for that. Every committee should be tasked with, among other things, looking for legislation that might apply to their area. I just think that makes, that's efficient.
All right. Bobby, would you be willing to lead the Committee on Accountability, Transparency, Satisfaction, and Interaction surveys?
I can do that. And one of my questions was, is there a target number of subcommittees on which we'll be serving? I think there's going to be a lot of trying to navigate this meeting and subcommittee meeting. I'm trying to get my head wrapped around that.
I was seeing if everyone could do 3.
Okay.
That was the initial request, to identify your top 3. And then if others want to participate in any of the others above the 3, they are invited to do so. David?
I would be glad to lead whatever group forms around the use of force.
Use of force, okay. David will do use of force. Angela is doing the unbundling, and Bobby is leading the accountability. Anyone else?
The others really seem to have a small number of people so far. I think maybe it makes sense to wait until we get everybody to respond.
Correct. So these 3 will proceed, and once I get the responses from other committee members, I will follow up. Valerie and I will follow up with them as well. Next week, I know there was mixed views on inviting representatives from Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, but to ensure it is a worthwhile preliminary discussion, it would be helpful if we could get the questions in advance so that we could present them to the Bureau and they can ensure they have the right individuals specific to those areas of focus participate in the conversation. Because 2 are not experts in everything, but they would ensure that persons who are responsible or have a knowledge foundation will participate in that conversation. So if you would all identify any questions that you want to present, send them to Valerie and I. We will compile them and we'll get them to them in advance so that they can adequately prepare and respond, in addition to any follow-up questions. And if you could get those questions to us by 5 o'clock Wednesday, that would be very helpful. Angela, do you have a hand, or is that still up?
My bad, I'll put it down, sorry.
That's all right. Patricia, is your hand up?
Yes. So, Dr. Bullock, what I was going to ask you is the format for the discussion next Monday with the police chief and the representative from FOP. Are we looking at just Q&A or open dialogue?
It will be facilitated by Q&A, which leads into the dialogue.
Okay, thank you.
So I believe this gives us quite a bit of action next steps that we can begin to work on. That's our 3 committees led by Angela on the unbundling, David on the use of force, and Bobby on accountability. Each task force member is also asked to send any questions that you would like asked to Valerie and I by 5 o'clock on Wednesday. We will in turn send those questions to the Bureau of Police, and they will help identify individuals who are responsible. And that includes school policing. That's a part of that same conversation, because it begins that conversation, and then we'll know where to go from there. And then the other is we're asking all task force members to please identify which subcommittee you would like to serve on. Once we get that, above the ones that have signed, we will respond to you individually to discuss your assignments based on the registry.
In addition, if you all have questions that that the police chief and or the police bureau cannot answer, or the Department of Public Safety, it may be a legal question. I was told that particularly with arbitration, honestly, you talk about accountability and discipline, it's the biggest problem that we have, and it's state. I asked, can anything be done? And there is a person in the law department. She's an assistant solicitor, and she kind of handles that. And she said I was told she's the kind of person that will very much educate you and give you real situations. You will appreciate her presentation. It's just something to consider as well, since a lot of these things are dictated by law, dictated by whatever. Recently, litigation is an issue. Recent litigation is why a lot of things cannot be discussed that you guys want to discuss, but you can't now because it's been filed in court. Something else, and let's see, hold on one second. I believe that's it. Oh, I will be making sure that there's other information posted. The ACLU 2015 lawsuit that dictates we're not a consent decree, we're under court order for certain things that impact some of the conversation that we have, as well as something with the police. It'll come to me. I got too many notes all over the place. But Dr. Bullock and I are speaking with people to make sure that we have a robust and a broad discussion. So again, very informed, thinking outside the box, talking to a myriad of people. But so look for more postings under the Google Docs.
Any other comments from task force members?
Not a comment, but another question about the discussion. So from the questions that you do receive from all of us, will you pull maybe 5 or 10 to ask at the first half, and then the second half will be open dialogue? Just to like avoid redundancy, like between the questions?
Oh yeah, we'll make sure they're not duplicates. If that's
right.
What you, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
we will.
And the Chief Schubert and Director Hisrich had offered they will meet however many times are necessary to finalize and get a great report of recommendations. So don't consider next week the only time. And if necessary, under committee structures, there can be more meetings with personnel that directly are involved in the issues at hand that you all are discussing. So next Monday is not the all be all. It's just one. Gets the party started.
That's fantastic to know. Thank you.
Right. Well, if nothing else, again, thank you for your time, commitment, and
Dr. Bullock?
Yes.
Sorry, just one last thing. I just requested in the chat, just an administrative request. Could we have the committee memberships and along with the committee leads perhaps listed in a directory filed by the staff, maybe the direct contact list could be a good file to place that information?
Hi, everyone. This is Annette. I can definitely do that. As soon as we have everyone fill out the survey, I will share with the co-chairs, and once it's approved, it could go in the Google Drive.
Thank you so much.
If everyone could just please do the Survey Monkey. I noticed on the chat that there are people, thank you, that are volunteering for committees. We thank you for that. But for logistics purposes, if we could have that put in a Survey Monkey so that staff can make a spreadsheet to share.
Again, thank you all. Enjoy your evening, and we look forward to getting your feedback in the next couple of days.